Saludos Preppers, en este nuevo vídeo os traigo un documental, se llama Imposible Sobrevivir, es una producción de LaRoueche y trata sobre la amenaza de una posible guerra termonuclear. Es un vídeo que ya subí hace tiempo al canal, lo quiero comentar con vosotros y además es un tema candente, pues el acuerdo de no proliferación de armas nucleares actualmente está bloqueado, fue bloqueado la semana pasada por parte de Rusia y ya os digo que es uno de los escenarios muy posibles que puede llegar a ocurrir en cualquier momento, ya que el armamento nuclear que hay en el mundo cada vez es mayor. Y es una amenaza que incluso Rusia en estos días, con el tema de la guerra en Ucrania, ha sacado a relucir, que si en el caso de que interfiera la OTAN, si interfiere Estados Unidos, etcétera, podrían lanzar ataques nucleares por el resto de Europa. Y de hecho han hecho simulaciones, hicimos aquí simulaciones de lo que ocurriría si caen en algunas ciudades del país. Entonces, es un documental que lo que trata es de las posibles amenazas de una guerra nuclear. Viene muy a cuento, así que vamos a verlo juntos. Es un vídeo que recuerdo ya subí anteriormente en el canal. Deciros que el documental está en inglés, subtitulado en español, lo veréis ahí abajo y lo iremos comentando según vaya pasando. Aquí veis el memorial de los marines en Estados Unidos. Deciros que también podremos subir más documentales en un futuro y que los vayamos comentando. De momento vamos a empezar con este.
It would come as a surprise. The secure communication system transmitting to the Ohio-class U.S. submarine fleet.
Intentaré no cortar demasiado el documental para que lo podamos ver todo de seguido. Haré comentarios en los momentos que sea necesario, ¿vale? Dejar solo esa aclaración.
Would be the first to receive the command. Patrolling both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, they are undetected. 14 of the 18 warships are equipped with 24 Trident missiles each, Trident 1s and Trident 2s. The remaining 4 are armed with 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be outfitted with nuclear warheads. The fleet as a whole represents half of the United States' strategic thermonuclear capability. A single Trident II missile is equipped with up to 8 nuclear warheads aboard a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle, or MIRV. A single W-88 warhead delivers the equivalent of 475 kilotons of TNT. In the case of a full deployment, the United States could unleash over 400 such missiles with between 6 and 8 warheads each.
Estamos viendo la capacidad militar de Estados Unidos.
From the time of launch, it can take less than 10 minutes for an SLBM to reach its target, or as little as 5 minutes if it is flown on a depressed trajectory. This allows a very short margin for reaction.
La capacidad de reacción ahora mismo con ataques nucleares, por ejemplo Rusia también amenazó con ello, es que la capacidad de reacción hicieron un simulacro que podían llegar a Londres, a Francia, incluso a España, y llegaban en torno, desde que se lanzaban, llegaban en muy poquitos minutos. Es decir que eran muy difíciles de contrarrestar, pero en el caso de que llegaran es que no tenías casi tiempo para prepararte, era una locura. El arsenal nuclear que hay actualmente en todo el mundo es muy peligroso.
early warning radar systems in Russia, China, and elsewhere immediately detect the missile plume. They can determine the trajectory and intended target of the missiles. Minutes fracture into seconds. This is not a test. This is not scheduled. Russian nuclear command and control systems, carried over from the Soviet era, leave little time to opt out or delay a full-fledged response. Within 50 seconds, the missile has peaked above the Earth's atmosphere. It reaches its top speed. The engine drops off. The bus releases multiple warheads as well as decoys. The radar systems on the ground are overwhelmed and unable to differentiate the two when they are in post-boost phase. Re-entering the atmosphere, the decoys burn off, and the warheads enter their terminal phase.
Es que apenas hay capacidad para reaccionar ante esto. En el caso de civiles.
It will be less than 180 seconds before they touch down.
Y las consecuencias... Mirar lo que es el hongo de la bomba nuclear. Impacta muchísimo. Es impactante las imágenes estas. Yo la primera vez que vi este documental me dejó impactado. Vamos a ver las consecuencias. Hemos visto la introducción.
That goes off in full in the first shot. Now you have in the submarines, you have the warheads you have not yet discharged. Those go along the way as a second wave.
LaRouche.
After that, you're pretty much out of weapons. After which, most everybody is dead. Most logistical systems are dead, non-functional. You have a situation where...
En los simulacros que hacía Rusia, en este tiempo cuando siguen en guerra Ucrania, pero hace ya unos meses, se hacían simulacros en televisión, en la televisión rusa, y se jactaban de que si empezaba una escalada de guerra nuclear, de ataques nucleares entre Europa, Estados Unidos y Rusia. Rusia actualmente es la potencia con mayor arsenal nuclear. Todo lo que lanzaban entre primeras oleadas, segundas oleadas y lo que lanzaran los aliados, Estados Unidos, Europa, etcétera, todo lo que se iba a lanzar es que prácticamente no iba a quedar supervivientes ni en la parte de Rusia, ni en la parte de Europa, ni en Estados Unidos, ni nada. Es una guerra suicida si esto llega a ocurrir. Como dicen en el documental, prácticamente estaría vivo ya.
Kind of firing creates a continuing effect which may go for several years. Now, instead of having one bomb, which is it's a nuclear super bomb with thermonuclear implications. Now, imagine you have the same kind of thing, or less, and you have not one big bomb. You have a whole barrage of such things. The exchange involves Russia. It
Rusia,
involves China,
China,
which has a very significant thermonuclear arsenal. It
También
implicitly
tiene.
involves India. It involves the United States. It involves the extermination virtually of Western Europe.
Sí, Europa se vería súper afectada y no creo que pudiera
And
resistir
this is what Obama
una guerra de este tipo.
represents. It's what he's intended. This is the end of civilization.
The flash was unimaginably bright. As the rain fell,
Esto es de
the
Hiroshima.
wind grew stronger and stronger, and suddenly, probably because of the tremendous convection set up by the blazing city, a whirlwind ripped through the park. They all felt terribly thirsty, and they drank from the river. At once they were nauseated and began vomiting, and they
Irradiada.
retched the whole day.
Agua irradiada.
Others were also nauseated, probably because of the strong odor of ionization and electric smell given off by the bomb's fission.
Es que ya no solo lo que es el efecto en el epicentro de la explosión, que es totalmente destructivo y de ahí no se salva nada, sino que todos los efectos que tiene a nivel de radiación, de contaminación, al final te afectan y acabas muriendo ya no solo por la explosión, sino por otra multitud de cosas.
It was very crowded, and to distinguish the living from the dead was not easy, for most of the people lay still with their eyes open. You reached down and took a woman by the hands, but her skin slipped off in huge glove-like pieces. Those who had their faces upturned when the bomb went off,
Quedaron ciegos.
they were all in exactly the same
Exactamente.
nightmarish state.
En el momento de la explosión,
Their faces were wholly burned. Their eye sockets were hollow. The fluid from their melted eyes had run down their cheeks.
decidme si no
Their mouths
impacta.
were mere
Si no impacta este
swollen,
documental.
pus-covered wounds, which they could not bear to stretch enough to admit the spout of a teapot.
La Little Boy, muy famosa. Fijaos que tenía 15 kilotones. 15 kilotones, nada más. Las actuales son muchísimo más potentes, mucho más destructivas. Es que si eres capaz de ver lo que puede llegar a ocurrir, ¿cómo no ser prepper?
The current world population is 7 billion persons. The current global nuclear arsenal is approximately 5,000 megatons. After a full nuclear exchange and the immediate loss of life at the points of direct impact and surrounding fallout zones, the ongoing environmental, climatic, and social consequences continue for years.
Exacto, sí.
The dust and soot picked up from fires, burning cities, and other target sites has been compared to a volcanic eruption, but far more long-lasting.
Estas son las consecuencias.
A regional nuclear conflict, employing only 0.3% of the global nuclear arsenal, would potentially result in 1 to 5 million metric tons of black carbon that would be spewed into the Earth's atmosphere. A spring or summer attack, or an attack in the extended region of the subtropics, would inevitably cause the smoke injections to heat, absorbing shortwave radiation, and to rise. Within a week, what is not washed out immediately in black rain has risen through the troposphere and into the upper stratosphere, where it will remain for many years.
Es que las consecuencias ambientales, que todo lo que ello conlleva para el poder cultivar alimentos, el agua está irradiada, los animales.
And the absorption of residual particles plunges global surface temperatures. While a regional nuclear exchange could result in global surface temperatures decreasing by 2 degrees Celsius, a large-scale nuclear conflict could alter these temperatures by -7 degrees or more. In the depth of the last ice age, some 18...
Es que temperaturas más altas, aunque cambie el clima por muy poco en cualquier región, hace que ya las cosechas no den lo mismo que daban antes, hace años. Es cuando en un sitio donde un tipo de cultivo está acostumbrado a un tipo de ambiente, el subir la temperatura, aunque sea 1 grado, aunque sea mínimamente, ya te puede fastidiar muchísimo a la hora de toda la producción, en tanto el tamaño como los que salen bien, etcétera.
15,000 years ago, the temperature difference from today was -5 degrees. Famine for billions of people far from the target zones would be the result of a -2 degree change. Growing seasons would be shortened by nearly 3 weeks, wiping out crops.
Efectivamente, sí.
A change in 5 degrees would sufficiently ruin Canadian agriculture entirely. If world grain reserves were not destroyed in the initial exchange, reserves would last for 71 days, with little, if any, means of transportation.
Lo que me gusta de este documental es que toca todos los puntos, no se deja prácticamente nada, yo pienso, y es para estudiarlo y verlo detenidamente las consecuencias que tiene una guerra nuclear. Es muy
The global
peligroso.
hydrological cycle would be disrupted due to the rapid climate change, and global precipitation would likely drop by 45%. The total integrated dose of radiation to living things could reach up to half the level of lethality for human beings, even in regions of the world outside the war latitudes. If nuclear installations were targeted, including plants, fuel cycle installations, and waste dumps, and nuclear materials were vaporized, it would create a very long-lasting impact on survivors. These are only the projected consequences, but it has been said that the effects of a nuclear war that cannot be calculated are just as important as those for which estimates exist. Both, however, are subject to very large uncertainties. These estimated consequences have, so far, survived the scrutiny of scientists in the East and West for the past 30 years.
Es que, como decía el documental, también hay consecuencias sociales a la hora de un ataque de este tipo.
This is a full-scale commitment to an attack on the entire Eurasian continent, especially the Asian side. And it's a military operation with a full panoply of every kind of weapon for general, essentially a nuclear warfare capability.
LaRouche,
with all components,
productor de este documental,
various kinds of ships, a vast accumulation of U.S. troops in that whole region, with auxiliary side in. You're looking at World War III, and nothing less than that.
Esto es
In the period of late
cuando Obama,
2011, U.S. President Barack Obama inaugurated a Pacific Century, or a Pacific Pivot, which expands U.S. military
Deciros que tiene unos años el documental. Aún así, las consecuencias son las mismas.
presence
De hecho, podrían ir incluso a peor, como mucho.
in the naval theaters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This expansion has been seen as an attempt to contain China and erode its regional sovereignty by building up a presence in bordering territories. Barack Obama's rebalance to the Pacific includes plans that would take effect over the coming years to station 4 littoral combat ships in Singapore, to obtain increased U.S. access to the Australian naval base at Perth, and increased troop levels at Darwin to 2,500 troops. There are also plans to expand troops in South Korea to 28,500, to expand troop presence in Guam, the Philippines, Japan, and to maintain the forward deployment of U.S. aircraft carriers in that theater. China has responded to increased U.S. presence in the Pacific with the Area Denial Anti-Access Strategy, Chinese military measures to keep adversaries out of strategic territory bordering their country, in particular the East China Sea.
De hecho, ahora hay bastante tensión
In addition, the Pacific Strategy also includes a missile defense shield, which would be on the soil of South Korea, Japan, and Australia, targeting Asia and the Middle East. As a response to what was seen as an Asia-Pacific arms race, Chinese press indicated that to improve its security, China would upgrade its nuclear weapon capability. They would also develop offensive nuclear-powered submarines with ballistic missile capabilities sufficient to break the interception capability of the U.S. missile defense system. In the spring of 2012, there was further warning that an overarching missile defense system would force China to change its long-held nuclear policy.
De hecho, la capacidad militar de
That China would revisit
muchísimo.
its policy of no first use and, if threatened, would consider an offensive nuclear strike.
La capacidad militar de China ha aumentado muchísimo.
We've begun a review that will identify our most important strategic interests and guide our defense priorities and spending over the coming decade. So here's what this region must know. As we end today's wars, I have directed my national security team to make our presence and mission in the Asia-Pacific a top priority. As a result, reductions in U.S. defense spending will not, I repeat, will not come at the expense of the Asia-Pacific. My guidance is clear. As we plan and budget for the future, we will allocate the resources necessary to maintain our strong military presence in this region.
Y no ha parado de aumentar el gasto militar.
Since the 2009 inauguration of the Obama administration, plans for the European phased adaptive approach have continued and escalated in spite of Russian offers of a joint ABM system. In May 2012, NATO announced that Phase 1 of that system was operational. Phase 1 includes the deployment of ballistic missile defense systems along the perimeter of Russia. As part of Phase 1, the United States has deployed a missile defense radar to Turkey. As of March 2011, an Aegis ship with BMD capabilities was deployed to the Mediterranean Sea, where it currently maintains a presence. An agreement was reached with Romania to host a U.S. land-based BMD interceptor site. Agreements were also reached with Poland to host a similar site. The existing naval facility in Rota, Spain, also agreed to host 4 U.S. Aegis destroyers, each with BMD capabilities and equipped with Tomahawk missiles able to deliver both conventional and nuclear warheads. Responding to the inauguration of Phase 1, Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, General Nikolai Makarov, warned that while a joint U.S.-Russia development of a BMD system was an option that should be pursued, the continued buildup of a BMD system on Russia's border was seen as a threat to Russian security and a provocation.
Es lo que han repetido hasta la saciedad Putin en la guerra de Ucrania, que se ve como una amenaza a Rusia. El sistema
The military would, therefore, consider a preemptive strike against the sites from Kaliningrad using Iskander missiles, truck-mobile, nuclear-capable tactical missiles with a range of up to 400 kilometers.
Размещение новых ударных вооружений на юге и северо-западе России. Для огневого поражения комплексов противоракетной обороны, включая развертывание ракетного комплекса «Искандер» в Калининградской области, представляет собой один из возможных вариантов разрушения инфраструктуры ПРО в Европе. С учетом дестабилизирующего характера системы ПРО, а именно создание иллюзии нанесения безнаказанного разоружающего удара, принятие решения об упреждающем применении имеющихся средств поражения будет приниматься в период обострения обстановки.
It was demonstrated at Brussels early in February 2012 that while Russia and China abstained from giving their support to UN Resolution 1973, they would forcefully draw the line on Syria and implicitly on Iran. That future interventions or regime change operations in violation of the United Nations' professed commitment to defend the sovereignty of all independent states would no longer be tolerated and would be countered by force if necessary.
Параметры, которые прописаны в этом договоре. Одновременно будет развернута очень широкая работа к тем, чтобы все страны или весь ядерный клуб, который очень обширен сейчас, подключились к этому договору. Мы понимаем, что так нельзя.
Я уже не говорю, что в какой-нибудь момент такие действия, которые подрывают государство.
Todos sabemos que mientras haya arsenales nucleares siempre son siempre hay una posibilidad de que puedan ser utilizados, y en el momento que sean utilizados es la destrucción total.
Государственный суверенитет могут закончиться вполне себе такой полноценной региональной войной. И даже, никого не хочу пугать, с применением ядерного оружия.
Es que decir que el uso de guerras nucleares, o sea, de ataques de armas nucleares pueden ser utilizados en guerras en alguna región concreta o en algún tipo de guerra, es que ya es levantar todas las alarmas porque es posible, y en caso de que puedan hacerlo ya no solo afecta a una región en concreto, sino que pueden afectar a todo el mundo porque te ves involucrado por tratados.
In a speech before the 18th General Assembly of the United Nations, President John Kennedy warned even little wars are dangerous in a nuclear world. Today it has been through the hardline preventive actions taken by the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Russian military and political leadership that have held back the tides of a threatened international conflict. Simultaneous with these delays, the economic conditions in the transatlantic have deteriorated to the point of imminent breakdown, while the Eurasian region has enjoyed relative prosperity in comparison. Since the hyperinflationary measures started in 2008 and continue unabated to this day, the transatlantic economies are in ruins and no longer maintain the semblance of economic power they had 30 years ago. Similarly, NATO no longer maintains the military power it had during the Cold War. Only the United Kingdom, France, and the United States among the NATO countries maintain their own nuclear arsenal. France is believed to have a nuclear stockpile of 300 warheads, and Britain maintains a stockpile of 225.
No lo he visto actualizado desde entonces. Este documental se haría por 2012, 2014, no sé de qué año es este documental. Sé que estaba lo de Obama y todo eso, sí que será algo más antiguo. Pero realmente vi los arsenales cuando empezó el tema de la guerra en Ucrania, porque estuve viendo, aparte que salía en los medios de comunicación, sí que quería ver cuál es el arsenal que hay actualmente en los distintos países. Vi que Rusia era la que más potencia militar tenía más arsenal nuclear, pero los números exactos de cuánto tiene Gran Bretaña, Francia, etcétera, Estados Unidos, no sé los números exactos.
With 160
pueden variar
active nuclear warheads.
De lo que pone aquí actualmente.
Britain, France, and the United States, after their cooperative mission to eliminate the Libyan head of state, are currently the most emphatic to end the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, despite the line drawn by Russia. This enthusiasm from the West has taken the form of openly arming barbaric opposition groups. They've claimed the right to enforce humanitarian intervention policies of the type championed by Iraq War architect Tony Blair. And from the United States, President Obama is escalating the propaganda campaign to establish the pretext for a full-fledged U.S.-led military intervention into Syria and beyond.
That a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
If world war were the intention, a Middle East attack would immediately engage the world powers of Russia and China. Inevitably, the United States would employ the greatest assets of its nuclear arsenal.
The trajectory of a ballistic missile launched from the Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean, the normal patrol areas of the Ohio-class submarine, would most likely cross China or Russia, assuming the target to be somewhere in the Middle East or Asia in general. This has two significant implications. First, the U.S. would have to inform Russia or China of its intentions prior to initiating a strike from a submarine, if either of those two nations was not the intended target, which blunts the effectiveness of the strike. Second, the launch acts as a datum for the submarine itself. If the launch platform is also carrying nuclear weapons, the effect of launching a missile makes the entire submarine and its nuclear payload more vulnerable. Assuming that other nations have been informed of an intention to launch a strike from a ballistic missile submarine, this may afford a nation an opportunity to actually destroy the submarine. For these two reasons, it is unlikely that any U.S. president will execute a non-nuclear strike from an Ohio-class submarine on strategic deterrent patrol.
Llegamos al final del documental prácticamente.
At the commencement of the August 1983 LaRouche Conference on the technological basis on which to build peace, Chairman Antonino Zikiki spoke of the consequences to humanity and the planet as a whole if a personality came on the scene foolish enough to provoke a worldwide thermonuclear confrontation. He warned that in history, fools have never been lacking. Sooner or later, in 10, 20, or maybe 100 years, a fool will come forth. When the fool appears on the scene, mankind will find itself with hundreds of millions of dead, with the ozone layer destroyed by 50%, with the average temperature of the planet lowered by at least 7 degrees.
Esto puede pasar.
With an enormous amount of radioactivity about, and with mountains of ashes instead of the vast treasures accumulated.
Solo hace falta un idiota al mando para que todo se vaya a tomar por culo. Lo hemos visto en guerras anteriores, en el futuro también lo veremos.
In centuries of laborious and intelligent activity in all parts of the world. When dealing at the level of thermonuclear war, these decisions ultimately fall to the personalities of the heads of state involved. When the American people chose Dwight D. Eisenhower to lead the nation, it was his handling of the Suez Crisis which drew us back from what would have inevitably escalated into nuclear war. When the American people selected John F. Kennedy to be Commander-in-Chief, it was his commitment to survival and progress and peace that guided his hand in dealing with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in Cuba, in Berlin, and in securing a nuclear test ban treaty. Today, the American people have chosen Barack Obama, who, at the earliest phase of his presidency, was already moving the apparatus into place that could and would trigger a worldwide nuclear holocaust.
Obama, on his part, is clinically insane. His state of mind, as manifest, is that of a clinically insane person. And it's a clinical insanity of the Nero type. So therefore, he is in a mood and on a road toward his own self-annihilation, whether as a personality or even more drastic measures. That is coming. This man is a type who is capable of suicide. This may be the first clear suicide case in the U.S. presidency. He's in the
Bueno, finalmente no se llegó a suicidar, como dice aquí.
The direction of getting there. Whether he actually gets there, the fact remains he's now developing rapidly in that direction.
Sí, con decisiones que a lo mejor no vinieron bien al país, a Estados Unidos, pero creo que a nivel
the
militar
American people will soon go to the polls to
acertadas.
decide the next president of the United States. Recent estimates and reports indicate that the United States military, in particular the U.S. naval capability, will be at its peak deployment capacity in the coming months before elements are retired, phased out, or cut from the budget. If ever there were a time to launch an attack, it would be now, in these coming months.
Próximos años, mejor dicho, desde el documental. Actualmente estamos en el momento de más tensión desde el momento en que se hizo el documental.
If ever there were a time to prevent such an attack, it would be now, before the consequences of the November 6 election.
Y hasta aquí el documental de Imposible Sobrevivir. Bueno, me gustaría saber qué os ha parecido el documental. Si queréis otros documentales, algún documental, el que sea, de Doomsday Preppers, de lo que queráis, podéis dejarlo aquí en los comentarios. Si queréis comentar algo sobre este documental, lo podéis hacer aquí también. Recordad que esto es un documental que se hizo hace ya bastantes años, pero sí que habla sobre la amenaza de una guerra termonuclear. Es una amenaza que a día de hoy es posible. Quería compartirlo con vosotros, aunque ya lo compartí en su momento, pero lo quité, así que lo dejo de nuevo en el canal. Así que espero que os suscribáis, que en los comentarios pongáis qué documental queréis que pongamos y subamos a continuación. Si lo tengo y lo encuentro, lo subiré para vosotros, si es posible en español. Y nos vemos en un próximo vídeo. Un saludo, Preppers.